Let me just give a quick rundown one more time of what we're doing today. We're talking about note-taking. We're talking about study skills. We're talking about studying. I want you to leave this session, whether you're watching live or you're watching this replay, I want you to feel better about what you're doing in class. I want you to feel confident about attacking any assessment that's put in front of you, you know, like whether you're taking any AP class or just an honors class or any class. It can get stressful when you have so much content to cut through and you're trying to keep up with class. And I know that the year is moving quickly and, you know, we're in November and, you know, it's a lot. And so I want to make sure you have what you need. So the ultimate guide to note taking, you can click below and get that. And I'm going to go through that. Okay. So again, post your questions. There's a lot of students in here as well that, you know, a lot of you guys have figured out a lot of different systems. You figured a lot out, and I'm going to go through some options, but you can help each other out. So whatever question you have about note taking, about studying, about anything, like how do you end the year with good grades? How do you feel really good about what you're doing? How do you know that you have a chapter to read and you don't feel stressed out? You know, like let me just ask you in general in this poll here. Let's put up a poll. How stressed are you? Let's see. So, in general, you guys are stressed. Look at this. None of you are none at all, right? Definitely not all of you have answered the poll. There's a whole lot more of you in here that have not answered the poll. But just as a sense here, a lot of you guys are feeling a lot of stress from school, right? From note taking, from studying, from the constant movement of your classes. So why take notes in the first place? And it's important that we talk about this because, you know, you can't just figure out how to do it if you don't know why you're doing it. You know, you got to start with these like whys. So why take notes, right? So ultimately, everything I'm going to go through tonight is a personal art. There's no right way to do it. There is no one size fits all. I'm going to show you a bunch of different options, but all of them will get the same thing done. And ultimately, that's your why. Why are you taking notes? So there's really 3 reasons as to why you should take notes. And notice that none of them are because my teacher told me to or because my grade needs it, right? You shouldn't be, even though I know that that's an incentive. I know that when it's part of your grade, that's probably why you're doing it. But at the end of the day, if you are actually taking notes for one of these 3 reasons, it's going to get a whole lot easier. You know, like you've got to give yourself incentive that's not so just like right in front of you. You know, it can't be because your teacher told you. It can't be because you need it on your grade. It needs to be for these deeper reasons. You know, that's how you're going to break through some of these barriers. So really 3 reasons. 1, you're trying to make sense of information, right? So maybe you're taking notes right now on how to take notes. Then you're doing that just to try to make sense of it, right? Like, what is it that I'm telling you? You know, and you're in a lecture or something. I'm trying to make sense of this. I need to draw it out. I need to write it down. I need to organize it. You know, those are different ways that your brain helps make sense of it. Another reason is just to remember the key facts. You know, like if you're in a lecture, you're not necessarily going to remember everything that was said. If you're reading a textbook, you're not necessarily going to remember everything that was said. So this is why you do it. This is why you write things down so that you can remember it later on. A third is just to refer back, right? Like you have your textbook, you have the notes from a lecture, you know, like you don't want to have to go back through your entire textbook, all the slides that you've ever seen before. You want to be able to have a concise place to look, you know, like we get prep books and things because those are shorter than the textbook, right? Like it's easier to read a prep book than to read your entire textbook. But it's even easier to just read through your notes because ideally you've just written down exactly what mattered. That's why. So, you know, those are your 3 reasons. Even though I said those 3 reasons, let me see in the chat. Let me see how many of you just take notes because your teacher told you to. Give me a 1 if that's you. If you are like, I'm just taking notes because it was assigned. Give me a 1. If you have an actual other reason of why you take notes and you really understand that, then give me another reason. Let's see what we got. All right, so Madison, you're definitely, yeah, you're like, you get it, right? And I get it too. I get it. I was a student too. I get it. Half the time you don't want to do something beyond what you were assigned. I get it. So, one of these three, the reason why you need to really, let me just, here we go. One of the reasons why it's so important to see these 3 reasons and to really understand that there's more to notes than just my teacher told me to. Your teacher told you to and you should, and that's awesome. But ultimately, like, you have a goal. You're in an AP class, or you are a student that's trying to go to college later. You're learning, you're trying to make sense of the world. And taking notes is going to help you do that. Adults do it in meetings. Adults do it in any other place that we are. So, we're not always in a classroom, but we're always getting information, and we're constantly writing things down because this is what drives us. No one told me to anymore, but I need to understand what's being told to me. I need to be able to remember things. I need to be able to refer back to it. Those are really important skills that you need to start to learn. Let's see. Yes, right. I do it for myself. That's awesome, Vera. So you forget, that you're going to forget things if they're just told to you. You need the notes for reference. So that's huge. Okay. And so, again, this PDF that I'm showing you right now, you can get it just right under. It's just that link right there on the green button. We'll open up the PDF in another window so you can keep this. So, you could be taking notes on what I'm saying right now, or you could look at this later. Doesn't matter to me. All right, let's talk about types of notes. Okay, so now that we understand why we do it, let's talk about the different types. And I've told you about these 3 before, but now that I have this nice packet, I think it's a little bit easier to kind of go through it. So there's really 3 types of notes, and honestly, you can do any kind of combination. Okay, so one more time, it's not, what I'm telling you is not the end all be all of note taking. This is how I have imagined it. This is how I see it. There are plenty of hybrid versions, ways that you can combine this, other ideas that you might have that work for you. These are 3 ways. So one way would be just 2-column notes, also known as Cornell style notes. Now, I know I'm just talking about 2-column notes. I know that Cornell style notes are very similar to this, and there might be some differences in what you've been told. But 2-column style notes are really good for chapters that you're reading that have section titles, that are kind of broken up. They're good for articles that have clear headings, and lectures, right? That have a clear, this is what the title of the lecture is. These are the different sections of the lecture. They're good for things that have sections because that's sort of how they're built, right? They're built to be divided up. And so they're really good for that. How to set it up. And I'm going to show you examples of all of these. So in general, you would just kind of fold your paper or create 2 columns and just leave the bottom open and kind of draw a line. And so the left side will be main ideas. The right side will be notes. And then on the very bottom of each page, you can summarize everything you did. And so the thing about the 2 columns is those main ideas are basically your headings, right? Every time you have a section title, a heading title, that's where you would write a main idea. And then the notes would just be sort of bullets of what is in that main idea, right? This is the what to write. And I know this is a huge question with students too. How do I know what's important? We'll get to that. But this is basically how it works, right? You have a heading and then you put some notes on there. The second type of notes is just outline style notes. So again, anything with headings is really good with this. But this ends up with the most pages, I would guess, of notes, right? This is where you kind of end up writing the most stuff. But you're basically just, the first heading is 1 or A, and then you kind of bullet and indent notes as you go, right? You're creating a hierarchy of the content. And so each top level is a section, And then you kind of have like subsections, and then you keep going. You have bullets in there. This is really easy to set up on just like a Word doc if you're taking notes on a computer. This is like the easiest version of that. The last would be mind maps. So mind maps are a lot more visual and a lot more about like organizing information. This is like really, really good for reviewing concepts or talking about like a lot of material at once. And you essentially like write the main idea in the middle of the paper with some shape around it. And then you sort of connect it to all the other concepts it's connected to. And as you read, you're like still connecting. So let me show you some examples. So how many of you, let's see. So in these examples, this is going to be for, it's a World War I, notes on World War I. So if you're taking AP World, or you've already taken AP World, this is good. So even in this packet, I include this like 2-page article about World War I, because it just sort of, this way you can see a clear example of like, this was something I read, this is something I wrote about World War I. But, if you take this and take notes on it, now you can look at my notes and see where I got them from. So we're going to stop talking about really abstract things and start talking about more specific things. So, but keep in mind, this is not specific to world history. You can do any of these notes using any subject, any material, any book, any article. I just chose World War I because most students will study it at least once, if not multiple times. So hopefully many of you have, heard about it, know about it. So this won't be like totally brand new content. So, okay, so you see I've got this article. So let's look at what my 2-column notes would look like. So keep in mind, so in this article, there were headings, right? So we had background and causes. The whole thing was just World War I. It goes through this whole, how did World War I start? Like what caused it? And this is that whole first page. Then it goes over a little bit about the actual war, how it ended, like the resolution of it, and then the effects of it. So this article is really in 4 parts. And that is, perfect for this exercise. So remember, guys, any questions you've got, post them in the questions, post them in the chat. I'm keeping up with them. I think, it's easier if you write your questions in the questions spot, because then I know it's kind of keeping track of them. So in case the chat gets a little crazy. All right, so let's look at 2-column. So basically in my 2-column notes, and there's no real like sense of like how many notes you should take. The kind of general rule is as few as you can, like you don't want to miss out on details, but you don't want pages and pages and pages of notes, right? So you want to take the least notes possible with the most information that you can have. That makes, doesn't make it easier for you, but that's my best way to put it. So, all right, so look, so here I have my 2 columns. I've got main ideas on the left and I've got notes on the right. The reason why you do 2 columns is so that you can physically fold it and quiz yourself, right? So if I fold the notes part back, I can quiz myself about what were the main causes of World War I, right? And then same thing, I can quiz myself on these other questions and not look at the other side. You can't really do that in outline notes. So this is a really good thing if you actually use it. If you actually are taking out your notes and studying it like this, then you should do this. If you're not using it, then you could be just wasting a whole lot of space here. Like that's something I notice with students is that maybe you're doing this type of notes, but you're not really doing it properly. So you're just wasting a whole bunch of space on the left instead of organizing them a little bit better. And that doesn't seem super useful. So, all right, so you see I've got causes of World War I. That was the first heading. And then I just sort of bullet out. Here are the main causes of World War I is easy because there's literally 4 main causes that start with those letters. And I just kind of, bullet them out. Sometimes I even have abbreviations because you're taking notes, you want to have abbreviations when it makes sense. And then even here, just sort of like using, parentheses, just trying to like take what I read and condense it down into as little words as possible with still getting the big picture, right? I could take these notes and write a paragraph about them. And then once you have the notes, then you can write this question I wrote at the end, right? I didn't do this as I went, although you kind of can, right? If the main idea is causes of World War I, then my question is most likely going to be, what are the causes? So same thing, here was the second heading, the war. Then I kind of bulleted out, 4 or 5 bullets. I tried to stay at one line per bullet, but that was just because I was trying to fit the whole thing on one page. And then ultimately it's just sort of like perfectly aligned. So again, I could fold this over and I could quiz myself. What happened at the peace negotiations? And I could quiz myself on that and see if I know it. And then at the bottom is the summary. And so notice that I kind of put the most words in the summary. And I know that if you are taking 2-column notes, students tend to hate the summary part of it. But the summary part is so useful because now, first of all, it forced me, after I wrote the notes, after I finished the 2 columns, it forced me to right then and there go back and read it and make some sense of it and see if I could put all of this into one paragraph. And that step alone helped me understand this content better. So just the process of actually doing the summary will help you. Yeah, then the process of now you have it. So when I'm studying later and I forgot all about World War I need to go back and learn it. Just reading this paragraph will save me a bunch of time, because remember that one paragraph is all of this combined, right? So instead of going back and having to reread this entire article, I can just read this one paragraph, which should help you. And then as you read it, you can, if there's pieces of it that don't totally make sense later on, then you can go back and just learn more about that one thing. So 2-column notes are pretty dope. And I'd say that they're pretty useful. Let me see if there's 2 questions in here, 3 questions in here. That's awesome. Okay, so I'll come into these questions after. So keep piling in your questions and I'll come into all of them at the end. So I just wanted to see if there's any just about 2-column notes. Okay, so then we have the exact same, I'm using the same article, the same World War I article. So now, it gets easier as we go through it, right? So we're using the same World War I article, and here are outline notes from the same article. So you can see, this one sort of has more written on it. But this is definitely the easiest one to do if you're typing, because your Word document will just sort of do this on its own. I also think it can be really good to do this as a first take through something. So for example, if you're reading a chapter and you're not really sure where it's going or even how to make sense of the whole chapter, it can be really easy to just take outline notes just as a really high level outline, and then go back and do 2-column or do mind maps, something like that. I think outline notes, you can get caught in a spiral of taking way too many notes. Full disclosure, I think that's just kind of how it is. But they're the easiest to set up and the easiest to kind of do on the fly, right? So if you open up any textbook, it's easy to set it up and to just kind of keep going with that. I would say, ultimately you want to try to condense each paragraph down to 1 or 2 bullet points. That's kind of the rule of thumb. And that was my rule of thumb in 2-column notes too. But I see these ones taking less time potentially, but having longer notes. So not always super useful. So, okay, so, same thing. I've got my headings, the same headings that were on the left column are, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then underneath, I just have, causes of World War One. Okay, well, it was sparked by this thing, and then here are the 4 causes. So it does make it super easy to just see what those are. And then here's the war. All right, well, here's the 4 things about the war that I needed to know. And then here was 3 reasons why the US joined. So I can just sort of see easily, like just list it out. So if you're someone who's just like, I just need to see the information listed, then this would work for you. Another thing that I put at the bottom here is you can also try turning your headings into questions. And then when you bullet information, you're just answering those questions. So if I were going to do that, I'd kind of do it as I went. So, as I'm reading this article, I'm like, okay, background and causes. So I know that this is just going to be, what are the causes? You don't have to make the questions very difficult. It's just what happened during the war, How was the war resolved? What effects did the war have? I can just sort of turn it into questions. And then instead of just writing effects of World War I, I could just make this say, what were the effects of World War I? And then that will kind of help me bullet point things of like, I need to just bullet these things out. I need to know what the effects were. And always in the terms of effects, you can organize things as short-term effects and long-term effects. So that was just a way that I added to that. Okay, so I saw a lot of you guys asking questions about mind maps. Here is my mind map for this article. So, okay, I personally love mind maps, but I didn't use them all the time as a student. And part of that is I think because I didn't really know about them. This is something I've learned as a teacher. But the other part is like, I think that they are kind of hard to do on the fly. So as you're reading a textbook, it's not the easiest to just do it as you go. Like taking outline notes or even 2-column would be way easier to just kind of do as you go. But I think these are so good for reviewing or doing after the fact. Or if you're someone who's super visual, like this can be really, really useful for you because sometimes you just need to see it out, like I can't. Making sense of all these words into other words is not very useful if you really just need to see these connections. I think this can be a lot easier to just understand what's going on. So I did this, World War I, you can put any shape you want around this. You can do some really cool things with mind maps. If you just Google like beautiful mind maps, people have done some like really awesome stuff. So, you've got World War I in here, and same thing. I just kind of started on one side. So here is my main causes, same, these bigger ones are my headings. And I sort of pulled out one of them, but here's the main causes. And then above that, just kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, it's kind of similar to outline, but it's organized in a different way. And I can keep like bullet pointing off of things. Here are the effects, short-term, long-term. The resolution, here's this happened, and then because of that, these 3 things happened. So I think it's helpful to see in terms of, just like general visualizing of data, which for me, I like that. I like the visualization. So, all right, so I'm going to cut through questions and then there's other, if you've got questions, put them in right now, or you can upvote them. So which method do you think is the least time consuming? So ultimately, it completely depends on you. Like you are the one that is going to do them. So for some people, mind maps would take forever. And for other people, mind maps would be the fastest. So ultimately, like you have to sort of figure out what you can do most efficiently. But I mean, it's hard to tell. I think the least time consuming could be maybe outline notes because they don't include any other pieces. But I don't think that those are the most useful. So you need to figure out a way to weigh efficiency and like usefulness. Right? Because you want to be able to do things quickly. Like I totally get that. you know, and that's true for everything, right? You always want to be able to do things as efficiently as possible because your time is limited. I know you're doing a million things. You've got a lot of classes. You've got time that you don't want to be spending on school all the time. So figuring out a way to do it as efficiently as possible will also help you with like time management. So for example, do your notes at the same time every day, right? Do a little bit each day. Things like that can also help you just take less time in notes, because ultimately, if you're taking hours and hours and hours to do your notes, like something has to give because that's too long. So you got to figure out, how do I do this faster? Maybe you're being distracted. Shut everything off, you know, turn your phone on do not disturb for 15 minutes. It's honestly such a lifesaver when you just turn your phone on do not disturb. Just leave it for 15 minutes and take notes for 15 minutes. That can save you a whole lot of time too. Okay, how do you know how to make the different connections for the mind maps? Okay, so this is now that I have this open, let me just show you. So ultimately, you know, you've got your main idea in the middle, and then you want to branch that out to sub ideas and then ideas beyond that, right? It's like, it's sort of like, what are all the things that are connected to this? And you want to be able to group things up so that they aren't just like, it doesn't end up being like one with a million little lines on it. You want to try to group it. So you can group it by the heading. Like that would be one way. That's how I did it on here. You also could group it by other characteristics that things have, right? Like, you know, that, I don't know, like, you know, when you're studying a certain topic, sometimes things are just kind of fit into similar things, right? Like causes or effects, or, you know, I keep thinking about like characteristics of life in biology. I don't know why I keep thinking about that, but if there's some other way that you can organize your material, then organize it that way. And ultimately, I think you want to be always thinking about, how might I be assessed on this? You know, am I going to have to write an essay? Am I going to answer multiple choice questions? Am I going to write short answer questions? Like, what am I going to have to do to show that I know this material? And see if you can group it up in different ways you might be asked about it. You know, like if I have to prove that I know World War I, I know I'm going to need to know the causes. I'm going to need to know the actual war. I'm going to need to know the effects, you know, things like that. Use the headings to help you. Done answering. Okay. All right. If we already have a slideshow to refer to, which is a broken down version of the textbook, then what do you think we should do? Well, that's awesome. So ultimately, and this might be true, is it just like the textbook slides? So, you know, for example, you can get the slides for almost any book. So like Bentley in AP World, or Rubenstein in AP Human Geography. Like if you just Google those things, you can find the slides, and the teachers oftentimes will use those. And so whether you have slides or whether you have, you know, a lecture that's happening or textbooks that you need to read, note-taking is still the same, right? So you need to figure out, I've got 30 slides here, or sometimes those slides are a lot. So I have this many slides. I need to condense this down. I don't want to have to look back at 30 slides. I want to be able to look at 2 pages of notes. So you're doing the exact same thing. You're not writing down everything on the slides. You're still trying to organize all of it into a smaller, more reasonable amount of information. So, you know, let's say usually the slides will be organized the same way as the book. There'll be some heading and then maybe subheadings. And you can kind of tell that they're all together. And so you would want to choose a style of note-taking, but then organize it by those like headings and subheadings, and try to condense the slides down, right? And try to combine them in other ways that you can. So that you don't have to look back at all of them and you have what you need in front of you. I would say if you have slides, I think mind maps can be a lot easier because you can kind of see where you're going a little bit better. And so you can almost visualize it as like, you know, you've got the like title slide in the middle, and then you're just sort of like connecting the other slides to it, if that makes sense. And so like, I don't know, in my brain that I see that and that works for me. And so if that works for you, then perfect. How would you suggest on taking 2-column notes with a textbook that doesn't have a lot of headers, but a lot of good information? Okay, so if your textbook does not have a lot of headers, then you need to sort of develop those out. So see if you can, for every single, even if it doesn't have a header. So let me open up, let me show you. On my article for World War I, there were some times when I'm talking about things that isn't the name of the header. It could have been broken down further, right? So even like this, right? Like this whole page is all one heading. And so this is just like a microcosm of your issue, right? This could have more headings, but there's a lot of good information here. So if I wanted to do, I could just use this as the heading and just take notes on all of this, or I can just add a heading. Just because there isn't one here doesn't mean that there couldn't have been, right? So I could add headings. I could just say, I don't know, I could have headings for every paragraph. I could have headings for, see if you can combine any of the paragraphs. So for example, here would be like alliances or like connections between countries, something like that. That could be a subheading. In this one, in resolution, or in here, in the war, this paragraph is like about the war itself. This paragraph could have been titled U.S. involvement in the war. And you saw like on my mind map, I added that. Like I added a heading here that wasn't there before. So I would say ultimately make it work for you. Like if the headings aren't there, add them. And in 2-column notes, like every time you're sort of done with this thought, add another heading. It makes it a whole lot easier to almost like think of your notes as like note cards, right? So like for every main idea, that's like its own card. So if you would not have written this note on the back of that card, then make a new heading of like what you would do. That's my advice. Okay. What else, you guys? What other questions we got? It seems like, definitely a lot of you in here. And, I did a session a few weeks ago on note-taking. Were any of you guys in that session, and did it help at all? Or have you looked through this ultimate guide already, and has this helped you at all? I'd love to hear feedback. Maybe you've looked at it and you're like, Amanda, this is not actually helping me out, and I don't know what you want me to get out of this because this is not useful. I don't know. Give me a sense of where we're at. Because I want you to leave this session and I want you to feel like I got this. I'm feeling better. All right, I added a new poll. How are you feeling now? So we can see where we're at. So if you're still feeling, I'm still hella stressed, then you can say there. And if you're feeling better, then awesome. And if you're feeling great, then awesome. The guide has helped you. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, okay, so if you're a teacher and you're watching this, like, I think ultimately, like for teachers, I think we need to just think about like what are we assigning and why are we assigning this? And is there a way to add choice? Like that's something that for me that I constantly ask myself. And with note-taking, there is a level of assigning notes and standardizing the notes and just keeping everyone on the same level just so that they learn what to do. And that I totally understand. And I think that's fine. And so you have to know your own students and know what they want. But at the end of the day, like if you can allow for choice with note taking, I think that can be really helpful for students. And for students that are listening, if your teacher is asking you to take one style of notes and you feel like it's not working for you, you should talk to your teacher. Because at the end of the day, like this is key. Like note taking is such a key skill. And, I really want to make sure that all students feel comfortable with this because it's not It shouldn't be something that we do just because, just because we were asked to. You're taking notes for a bigger purpose. So it's good that a lot of you guys are feeling better. Didn't know how to explain the best use of mind maps. Yeah. I mean, I feel like mind maps are just like perfect for reviewing because you can just do like giant concepts and break them down, like in psychology, for example, in AP Psych, it's like 14 units. And so I just kind of see each of those units as like a perfect mind map, and I think you could do the same thing in any history class. As a review, you could do, here's time period 2, and then sort of from that you could kind of cut into like, social, political, different things. Visual note taking, I'm not sure what visual note taking is, just like, like just drawing stuff. I mean, one of the things, so let me just show some of the ways that you guys can modify, and I think this will help. Because ultimately, like with note taking, there's just no right way to do it. Well, that's weird. And so you, as students, you need to figure out, how can I make any modifications or any adaptations to this that will help me understand the material. So I highly recommend color coding. So if, where you write things on paper is just one level of organization. If you highlight or you add color from different color pens or something, it gives another level of organizing, right? So if I had highlighted any of these notes, this would have been a whole lot easier to go back and see really fast. I could have highlighted by topic or by things that I understand or things that I don't understand. I can do the same thing with like Post-its, right? Like I could just add Post-its to it. I can bookmark these notes for myself. Similar. And it just gives you another sense of organization. And, doodles, like add drawings. If you love drawing, even if you don't love drawing, adding little drawings of what you're reading can actually be really useful for you, because you're just, again, making sense of it. You're making the material work for you. And so, I'm writing about World War I. Well, what if I just drew a little up here? New technologies were massively destructive. And so maybe I drew a tank up here. It just helps me like understand it. It doesn't have to be a good tank, but draw a tank, or if I'm writing about, what happened at the peace negotiations, maybe I just write down what I imagine the peace negotiations to look like. I have a little stick figure for Wilson and a little stick figure for, all the other guys that were there. And it just, I don't know, it could make it a little bit more fun for you. And it also like helps you process it, like if I have to draw the 4 guys sitting at, this Paris Peace Conference thinking about how to treat Germany, it might be useful to just draw them, and then I'm imagining them, and so it's easier to commit that to memory. Another huge piece of advice is to read out loud. And if you read out loud, I know it can feel really awkward to do it, but find a place where you can read out loud to yourself. You don't have to read out to someone else. Read out loud to yourself. It will help you a whole lot. It also just like makes you a better reader. And that's ultimately like the key with note taking, is like becoming a better reader. And so it can help you to hear the information out loud. It can help you to process it. It can help you to organize it. Reading out loud is huge. The other thing is shorthand. So, develop abbreviations for yourself. You can take notes like you would text. That's important. You just need to make sure you remember what you wrote. Like make a little key. If you have a lot of acronyms, make yourself a little key. Okay. Sometimes color coding is hard when the teacher is talking so fast. So color coding is something you might want to do later. And so this is actually exactly what I'm going to talk about in this section. This is perfect. So one of the things you can do is if you're taking notes from a lecture, I wouldn't color code as I go. I would take notes, the whole thing in one color, in like black, or blue or whatever, just in pen or pencil. And then I'd go back over them. Go back, go home that day and just look over your notes and highlight. Highlight things that you really understood. Highlight other things that you really don't understand. You know, highlight things you want to ask questions about. You can develop anything that any way to organize it, but just going back over your notes will help you. And then that's a good use of your time, right? If you get in the habit of do that every day, you know, take notes in every class, no matter what, take some level of notes. And then after school every day, take out your notes and take a highlighter and go back through and just see, okay, I totally understand this. I'm going to highlight it in green because we're good to go. But this one, I really didn't understand. So I'm going to put a little, you know, red star next to it. And I'm going to make sure that tomorrow I ask about this, or I'm going to Google this and see if I can find some other explanation of it. You know, that I think is the most useful way of highlighting, color coding. Okay. So a couple other ways to, like, you know, actually studying your notes. This is super important because it's one thing to take notes, but then if you just take them and shove them in a binder somewhere and never look at them again, that's a problem because you need to actually take the time to study them. So I kind of covered these two things, you know, skim your notes every single day. It just helps to just add some time to just look over it, and add color codes to it. Take your notes and create note cards or use Quizlet for them. That can be a useful way to study. I already talked about reading out loud, but just reading out loud can be useful when you're taking notes. Like, read the textbook out loud to yourself. It can also be useful when you're studying. Take your notes and read them out loud to yourself. It will help you figure out what you understand and what you don't understand. Because, like, when you do everything in your head, sometimes it doesn't always, you're not actually understanding it. You're just kind of quickly reading through it. Another thing is just like a buddy system. Like, one of the best ways to learn is to teach. Like, straight up, I learned so much more as a teacher and have learned so much more as a teacher than I probably did in all of college. Like, that's just how I feel. I've learned so much because when you have some sort of topic that you have to now explain to others, you need to make sure you understand it. And so you can use that to your advantage. Find a friend, find a buddy that is in the same class as you. And teach each other, you know, like every week, meet up at lunch, meet up before school, after school, on the weekends, and just pick a few concepts and you take some and they take others and teach each other. Because if you have to explain it and actually, like, teach this other person this concept, you have to make sure you understand it. And so there's a huge advantage that your teacher has because of that. Like, obviously they're an adult and they probably knew this before, but they have to now take that information and explain it to others. That's a huge advantage. So the only reason why teachers, why we understand things better is because we had to understand it in order to explain it. So as a student, make that work for you too. That's like the best advice I have, is to just, like, find someone to teach. You know, even, like, make your little sibling sit down and learn some stuff. I used to make my brother learn things all the time when I was young and he hated me for it, but I learned some stuff every time I did it. So whatever. Some frequently asked questions, and you guys have already asked a lot of these questions, but ultimately, you know, how long should my notes be? There's no magic number, and there's no right answer here. It's what did I say? Notes from about a 30-page chapter should be around, like, 4 to 6, like, sides of paper. So, you know, 2 to 3 pieces of paper, like, ideally, but that's like, so that's kind of completely arbitrary. You could have amazing notes be less, and you could have amazing notes be more. So it really depends on your handwriting and the topic at hand and how much you understood before. Like, there's a lot that goes into this. So there is no right answer. How do I know what to write down? This is just one of those things that gets better over time. You know, use the headings to guide you and focus on the big themes. Just, like, keep yourself really grounded in, like, what actually matters here. You know, when you look at your textbook chapter, what is it that I need to, what's the whole point of this chapter? Like, ask yourself that. a lot of times they'll tell you the point of the chapter in the first paragraph, or they'll have some kind of question at the beginning. Like, that's the point of the chapter. So keep your notes tied to the whole point, so you don't go off on some tangent about, what this person's childhood was like. Like, who cares if that's not the point of the chapter? That will get easier with time. How can I take less time with my notes? The biggest thing, y'all, is distractions. So just like I said, shut things off. I give you some ideal here. 5 pages of reading should take about 30 minutes to read. That is completely arbitrary. I was just trying to pick a number that I thought was a fair, guess. If it takes you longer, that's okay. If it takes you shorter, that's okay too. So some of the things that you can control are distractions. You can help give yourself like deep focus. There's a whole lot of research about this. There's even an app that will help you do this. It's called Forest, and it's kind of cool because little trees will grow as you are focused, which I think is kind of cool. And you can build a whole forest. And so you literally can turn it on, and it will sort of silence all your other apps, and it will just keep track. So you basically stay hyper focused for like 15 minutes, or you can, I think, choose how long you want. And then you take a break, and then you take a break for 5 minutes and you stop. And then you jump back in for 15 minutes. You're going to get a whole lot more done in those, what ends up being 30 minutes than if you kind of keep trying to get back into it. So that would be, that's a good hack right there. The other thing to just talk about is like, how can I get better at reading? Because reading is ultimately the skill at the root of note taking. And so if you feel like, you're not reading, you're not understanding this textbook, that means that you need to improve on your reading. And so it's really tough when you're already in high school and that you're like not reading on grade level, or at least on the college level textbook. So how do you get better? One of the things that you can do is just build your vocabulary. As you read, every time you don't understand a word, you have to stop and look it up. And I realize that for some, that means it's going to take a long time to finish, but it's worth it, because every time you stop and look something up, the next time you come across that word, you won't have to. So keep a running list. Every word that you don't understand, stop, look it up, understand it, and then go back in. You will become a better reader over time. Again, read out loud to yourself. That will help you. Every time something is just super confusing, you read a paragraph over and over again, you don't have any idea what it's talking about, just stop and Google it. See if you can find some other display of it, a visual of it or something. Like, you have to be able to take those steps to fill in those gaps. Okay, so when my teacher is giving good information to the whole class and there's notes to take on the board, sometimes I don't catch all the information because I'm too focused on the notes. So the best thing that you can do is to, just like we were talking about, like deep focus, sometimes it's a lot easier to just do like one thing at a time. So for example, if your teacher if they have slides that they are showing to the class and it's really hard for you to be able to listen and write, ask your teacher for the slides ahead of time, right? See if you can get them printed out so that they're in front of you and your notes can just be adding on to that, or later on, you can always take notes from the slides, but in class, you can listen and just highlight the most important pieces. That's one way that you can do it. Another way that you can do it is, let's see, can't catch all the information because I'm too focused on the notes. So, basically look at the board, or see if you can take a picture of the board and then take notes of that picture later. I realize that like as teachers, sometimes we're like, no, you can't, you have to be writing, but work with your teachers. See if you can figure out a strategy that will work for you, because, I know that can be really difficult when teachers talking, there's stuff that you want to write down and you need to think about writing it down, but you also want to listen. So you kind of have to choose one or the other. Can I stop and listen, or should I write? And if you can't do both, what can I do later? So another option would be write in class and record the lecture. you know, just like take up, you know, you've got your phone on, you get an app to record it. And that way you can listen back to it later and go back into your notes and add. So you kind of have to choose, write or listen, and do the other one later. That would be my guess. All right, my friends, any other questions that you've got? I definitely want to make sure, you know, I think that these sessions have been helpful for you. I think there's one other question here. All right, let me post this as a question. I'm a student. I often take too much notes and then don't really matter without realizing it. How do I solve this problem? Okay, so one of the ways that if you know you're taking too much notes, you have to go back and look at, like, what are you writing down? One of the things that you can do is to sort of take a quiz that comes up and look at your notes, look at the quiz, what was asked about on this quiz, what wasn't, right? Like, what on my notes was just too much, was excessive. And then you can kind of see, like, where are you getting bogged down? And then next time you'll kind of learn, okay, this is where I get bogged down. I need to skim through this more. Another thing is just ultimately, if you can get every paragraph down to like 1 or 2 bullet points, that should keep you at a pretty good pace. So if you're writing more than that, then you're potentially writing too much. Those are my best guesses. I can't see your notes. You're welcome to email me a picture of your notes and I can help you out more specifically. But you know, it's just kind of one of those things that, like, you eventually will figure out, like, this is not necessary. It's all about figuring out, like, what's the point of this chapter? What do I need from here? And if you're writing more than, if you're beyond that piece of it, then that's where you'll need to condense things down. Okay, one more. I tend to not make connections with my notes. I could understand basic concepts, but I can't apply this knowledge when I'm taking quizzes. That's a great question. So, Alexander, my suggestion for you is that you need to be working with your notes more than just when you take them. So you take your notes the first time, you know, you have them down, whether you were reading or you were listening, and then you have your notes down. You need to go back to the notes and make those connections, right? So the first time through, it's hard to make connections and read and take notes. But it's easy to take the notes and then go back, you know, make connections between what you did. Maybe you do a mind map before every test you take, you know, and that will help you make sense of the whole thing, connect the different pieces together. Or if you are someone who likes to doodle or likes to draw, that can help you make connections too, because you can sort of, you know, understand some of the higher level topics by just like drawing different pieces or diagrams, or, you know, it depends on the subject. But ultimately, in order to do well on quizzes, you'll need to be able to apply the knowledge. And so you sort of have to like practice that beforehand, you know, look at your notes and figure out how might I get quizzed on this? What kind of question am I going to be asked? You know, like, create a quiz for yourself. Like, you have notes on some chapter, on something, create a little quiz. Look at the quizzes that you've already been given in class and see if you can create the quiz that you might get for this. You know, ultimately, all teachers have a style. You know, there's a format to things. You're not going to write it perfectly. It's not going to be exact, but you can kind of come up with similar type questions. You know, there's only so many ways to assess things. Get close and see if you can practice with that. And you'll get better over time, but take the time to take your notes and take what you have and apply it and do more with it and do something with it, so that when you're actually quizzed, it's not your first time doing it. All right, so it's pretty late, so I'm gonna stop this stream at this point. Use the ultimate guide to note taking. I'm also gonna do another session in 2 weeks on like the Sunday before Thanksgiving about like how to study over break. So just general, like, okay, you know, maybe you have the whole week off, maybe you just have a few days off, but how can you use that time to study in ways that doesn't seem so boring, right? Like studying doesn't just have to be like, I'm in a book and I'm reading. There's a whole lot of other ways that you can do it. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few weeks. So this whole like study skills, these sessions, I'm going to keep doing them every few weeks and really make sure that you're practicing. And I definitely recommend going through the Ultimate Guide on your own and try something out. Take one piece of information that I gave you in this whole session and try it this week. Just try it. Try a different note style, try something, or color coding, or one thing. And then from there, see if that worked. If it didn't work, then stop doing it, you know, or adjust, keep adjusting, keep adding, keep adjusting, find the thing that's going to work for you. And with that, I'm out. Thank you guys so much. This was an awesome session, and I hope that it was helpful for you. So you're welcome. So thank you guys. In the chat, if you could, if this was helpful for you, please let me know in the chat. You can give me a 1 in the chat if you're like, this is great. Thank you. And if it, you know, if it wasn't helpful for you, then I don't know, give me a 0. 1s or 0s. This is all like a binary. This is a binary system. All right. Good night.